The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Catherine's orphanage, casting rainbow prisms across the worn wooden floors. Sister Grace Margaret smoothed down her simple gray habit and adjusted her white veil, tucking a stubborn strand of blonde hair back underneath. At 23, she was one of the youngest nuns in the order, having taken her final vows just 8 months ago after years of feeling called to serve God and the most vulnerable of His children. The orphanage was her sanctuary, her purpose, her life. Every day she woke at 5 in the morning for prayers, then spent her hours caring for the 37 children who called St. Catherine's home. She read them stories, bandaged their scraped knees, dried their tears, and tucked them into bed each night with a prayer and a gentle kiss on the forehead. This was the life she had chosen, and she had never looked back, until today. Sister Grace was in the orphanage's small library, helping 8-year-old Tommy sound out the words in his reader, when Sister Margaret Mary rushed in, her round face flushed with excitement. "Grace! Oh, Grace, you must come quickly. We have a very important visitor." Grace looked up from Tommy's book, confused. "A visitor? We weren't expecting anyone today." I know, but he's here, and Mother Superior is beside herself. It's Alexander Thornwood. The Alexander Thornwood." The name meant nothing to Grace. She had lived a sheltered life before joining the convent, raised in a small rural town by deeply religious parents who had little use for worldly news or celebrity gossip. Even during her years of discernment, she had kept herself removed from such things, focusing instead on scripture and service. "Who?" she asked, earning an exasperated look from Sister Margaret Mary. "Only one of the wealthiest men in the country. He owns Thornwood Industries, technology, real estate, investment firms. He's worth billions, Grace. Billions. And he's here at our little orphanage." Grace stood slowly, brushing imaginary dust from her habit. Why would someone like that come here? Mother Superior thinks he might be interested in making a donation. Oh, Grace, do you know what even a small gift from someone like him could mean for the children? We could finally fix the roof in the east wing, replace the boiler, perhaps even expand the playground. Grace's heart quickened at the thought. The orphanage operated on such a thin budget, relying on small donations from parishioners and whatever grants Sister Margaret Mary could secure from the diocese. The children deserved so much more than the threadbare clothes and simple meals they received. If this Mr. Thornwood could help them, then she would welcome him warmly, billionaire or not. She followed Sister Margaret Mary down the hallway toward Mother Superior's office, their soft-soled shoes making barely a whisper on the old floors. As they approached, she could hear voices. Mother Superior's familiar warm tone and another voice, deeper, rich, and cultured, with an edge of authority that suggested a man accustomed to being obeyed. Sister Margaret Mary knocked gently on the doorframe, and Mother Superior looked up, her weathered face brightening. "Ah, Sister Grace, please come in. Mr. Thornwood, this is Sister Grace Margaret, one of our most dedicated sisters. She works directly with the children every day." Grace stepped into the office and finally saw him. Alexander Thornwood stood by the window, backlit by the morning sun, and for a moment Grace forgot to breathe. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His dark hair was styled with casual precision, and when he turned to face her, she found herself looking into eyes the color of storm clouds, gray and intense and utterly captivating. His face was all strong lines and angles, with a square jaw that suggested determination and a mouth that quirked into a slight smile as he extended his hand toward her. "Sister Grace," he said, his voice sending an unexpected shiver down her spine. "It's a pleasure to meet you." She realized she was staring and quickly lowered her gaze, extending her own hand for a brief, proper handshake. His palm was warm and strong, his grip confident but not crushing. "Mr. Thornwood," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Welcome to St. Catherine's. Please, call me Alexander." His eyes hadn't left her face, and she felt heat creeping up her neck. "Mother Superior has been telling me about the wonderful work you do here. I'm impressed by your dedication to these children." Grace clasped her hands together in front of her, a gesture of humility she had perfected over her years in the order. The children are a blessing. We do what we can with what we have, but it is God who provides. Something flickered in Alexander's expression. Interest, perhaps, or amusement. Then perhaps God has provided me with an opportunity to help. He turned back to Mother Superior. I'd like to tour the facility, if that's acceptable. I want to see exactly what you need, and where I can make the most impact. Mother Superior practically glowed with joy. Of course. Sister Grace, would you be so kind as to show Mr. Thornwood around? You know every corner of this place better than anyone. Grace wanted to refuse. Something about this man unsettled her in a way she couldn't name. But duty was duty, and if showing him around meant help for the children, she would swallow her discomfort. Of course, Mother Superior. Mr. Thornwood, if you'll follow me? She led him out of the office and down the main hallway, acutely aware of his presence behind her. He was quiet as they walked, but she could feel his gaze taking in every detail. The peeling paint on the walls, the water stains on the ceiling, the worn carpet that had been patched and repatched over the years. How long have you been here, Sister Grace? He asked as they passed the dining hall. At St. Catherine's? 2 years. But I've been with the order for 5". You seem young to have made such a commitment. She glanced back at him, surprised by the observation. Most people either didn't think about her age or simply assumed she knew what she was doing. I was called, she said simply. When God calls, age is irrelevant. And you've never had doubts. The question was impertinent, almost invasive, but something in his tone suggested genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Everyone has doubts, Mr. Thornwood. Faith doesn't mean the absence of questions. It means choosing to believe despite them. He smiled at that, a real smile that transformed his face from merely handsome to something approaching devastating. That's a wise perspective. They entered the children's common room, where a dozen children were engaged in various activities. Little Maria was coloring at one of the low tables, while the older boys worked on a puzzle in the corner. The moment the children spotted Grace, they came running. Sister Grace, Sister Grace, look what I drew. Maria thrust her picture forward, a crayon rendering of what appeared to be a rainbow with legs. That's beautiful, Maria. Grace knelt down to the child's level, genuine warmth suffusing her features. Alexander watched as she gave each child who approached her undivided attention, remembering names, admiring artwork, answering questions. She was completely unself-conscious, focused entirely on making each child feel seen and valued. Sister Grace has a visitor, children, she said gently. This is Mr. Thornwood. He's here to learn about our home. The children regarded Alexander with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. He was an outsider, and outsiders were always uncertain. But then he did something that surprised Grace. He crouched down to their level, just as she had, and smiled at them with genuine warmth. Hello, he said to Maria. That's a magnificent rainbow. I especially like the purple. Maria beamed. It's my favorite color. Mine too, Alexander confided, as though sharing a great secret. For the next 20 minutes, Grace watched in amazement as this billionaire businessman sat on the floor with a group of orphan children, asking them about their interests, their dreams, their favorite things. He didn't check his watch or seem impatient. He listened with the same intensity she imagined he brought to boardroom negotiations. When they finally continued the tour, visiting the dormitories, the cramped kitchen, the small schoolroom where Sister Teresa taught basic lessons, Alexander asked thoughtful questions and took notes on his phone. He noticed things Grace had long since grown accustomed to. The lack of proper heating, the outdated textbooks, the shortage of personal items for each child. They share almost everything, Grace explained as they stood in the girls' dormitory, looking at the rows of narrow beds. Clothes, toys, books. We do our best to make each child feel special, but resources are limited. What would you change if you could? Alexander asked, turning to look at her directly. If money were no object, what would you do for these children? Grace hesitated, and used to such hypothetical questions. But then the words came pouring out. All the dreams she had harbored in her heart but never voiced because they seemed so impossible. I'd give each child their own room, or at least share with just one other child instead of 8. I'd fill those rooms with books and toys and things that belonged just to them. I'd upgrade the kitchen so we could provide fresh, nutritious meals instead of the same 5 dishes we rotate through. I'd hire more staff so each child could get individual attention, tutoring if they needed it, counseling to help them process their trauma. I'd create a proper playground with safe, modern equipment. I'd ensure they had new clothes that fit properly instead of hand-me-downs.
ED.
She stopped abruptly, embarrassed by her passion.
I'm sorry.
I know I sound greedy. We're grateful for everything we have. You don't sound greedy? Alexander said quietly, and something in his voice made her look up at him. His expression was intense, focused entirely on her in a way that made her pulse quicken. You sound like someone who truly loves these children. I do, she whispered. They deserve so much more than the world has given them. Then they'll have it. Grace blinked.
I'm sorry.
Alexander pulled out his phone and tapped the screen a few times. I'm transferring $5 million to St. Catherine's account effective immediately. That should cover the immediate repairs and improvements. I'll also establish a trust fund that will provide a steady income for operational expenses going forward. Additionally, I'd like to personally sponsor each child's education, from now through college, if they choose to attend. Grace stared at him, certain she had misheard. $5 million? To start. I'll work with Mother Superior to determine what additional support might be needed. He said it so casually, as though he were discussing lunch plans rather than an amount of money Grace couldn't even conceptualize. I don't know what to say. Tears pricked at her eyes, and she blinked them back rapidly. Nuns weren't supposed to be emotional. Mr. Thornwood, this is... Thank you. Thank you so much. The children will have the childhood they deserve, he finished. Then, more softly, and please call me Alexander. I have a feeling we'll be seeing more of each other. That should have been a simple statement. After all, a donor of his magnitude would naturally want to stay involved with the project. But something about the way he said it, the way he was looking at her, made it feel like something else entirely. Something that sent a forbidden thrill through her even as her mind rejected it absolutely. Over the following weeks, Alexander became a regular presence at St. Catherine's. He was there when the contractors came to assess the roof. He consulted with architects on plans to expand the facility. He met with Mother Superior to discuss hiring additional staff. And somehow, inevitably, he always found his way to wherever Grace was working. She told herself it was natural. She was the sister who spent the most time with the children, so of course he would seek her input. But there was no denying the way her heart jumped when she heard his voice in the hallway, or how aware she became of his presence whenever he was near. One afternoon, she was in the small garden behind the orphanage, teaching a group of younger children about plants and growing things. The garden was one of her favorite places. A small patch of peace where tomatoes and herbs grew in neat rows, tended by whichever children showed interest. Sister Grace, look, the tomatoes are turning red. 6-year-old Emma pointed excitedly at one of the plants. Grace knelt beside her, examining the fruit. You're right. That means they're almost ready to pick. You've done an excellent job caring for this plant, Emma. You should be very proud. I watered it every day, and it shows. You're a natural gardener. What's a natural gardener? Someone who has a special gift for helping things grow. Came Alexander's voice from behind them. Grace turned to find him standing at the garden gate, his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, looking somehow both professional and relaxed. Like Sister Grace. Emma regarded him seriously. Do you have a special gift, Mr. Thornwood? He seemed to consider this. I suppose I'm good at building things, making things bigger and better than they were before. Like Sister Grace's garden. Exactly like that. Grace stood, brushing dirt from her habit. I didn't know you were visiting today. I wasn't planning to, but I was in the area and thought I'd stop by to check on the progress of the new dormitory wing. He stepped into the garden, and Emma immediately took his hand, pulling him toward the vegetables. "Come see what we're growing. Sister Grace taught me about photosynthesis." Grace watched as Emma dragged this billionaire businessman around their modest garden, explaining with great enthusiasm about each plant and what she had learned. Alexander listened with the same focused attention he gave to everything, asking questions that showed he was genuinely interested. "You're very patient with them," Grace observed when Emma ran off to get some other children to show off the tomatoes. "They're easy to be patient with. They're honest, authentic. They say what they mean and feel what they feel without pretense." He looked at her, and once again she felt that strange electricity in the air between them. "It's refreshing. As opposed to your usual company?" "Very much so. My world is full of people who want something from me. These children just want someone to listen to them, to care about them." He paused. "Like you do." Grace felt her cheeks warm. "It's my calling." "Is it?" He took a step closer, and she was suddenly very aware that they were partially hidden from the orphanage's windows by a trellis of climbing beans. "Or is it something more?" "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" His voice was soft, almost intimate. "Grace, I've met a lot of religious people in my life. People who work in charity, who dedicate themselves to service. But there's something different about you. You don't just care for these children out of duty. You love them. Actually love them. With your whole heart." "Of course I do. They're worth loving, I know. But there's more to it than that. You pour yourself into them. Give them everything you have." He was close enough now that she could smell his cologne. Something subtle and expensive. "It makes me wonder what might happen if someone tried to give something back to you." Grace's breath caught. She knew she should step back, should remind him of who she was, what she was. But his proximity was doing strange things to her ability to think clearly. "Mr. Thornwood." "Alexander." "Alexander," she conceded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've made vows. Vows I take very seriously." "I know, and I respect that," but he didn't move away. "I'm not asking you to break them, Grace. I just want you to know that I see you. Not just Sister Grace Margaret, the nun who works at the orphanage, but Grace, the woman beneath the habit, the one with dirt under her fingernails and a smile that could light up the darkest room. The one who gives so much of herself that I wonder if anyone has ever given anything back to you." "God gives me everything I need," she said, but the words sounded weak even to her own ears. "Does he?" Alexander's hand lifted, and for a heart-stopping moment, she thought he was going to touch her face. But at the last second, he redirected, pointing past her shoulder. "The children are coming back." Grace spun around to see Emma returning with 3 other children in tow, all excited to show Mr. Thornwood their various plants. The moment was broken, but its effect lingered. As Alexander was swept up in another enthusiastic garden tour, Grace pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart race beneath her palm. This was dangerous. Whatever was happening between them, this pull, this awareness, it was dangerous. She had made vows, sacred vows. She belonged to God, to the church, to service. There was no room in her life for these feelings, whatever they were. But as she watched Alexander laugh at something one of the children said, his whole face transforming with genuine joy, she couldn't deny the truth. Something inside her was waking up, something she had thought she'd buried forever when she took her final vows. Something that whispered that maybe, just maybe, she had made a terrible mistake. That night, Grace knelt in the small chapel for hours after evening prayers, begging God for guidance. She confessed her confusion, her inappropriate awareness of Alexander, her fear that she was failing in her vows. She prayed until her knees ached and her eyes burned with unshed tears. But no clear answer came, just the quiet darkness and the flickering candles and her own treacherous heart, beating a rhythm that sounded suspiciously like Alexander's name. The construction on the new wing progressed rapidly. Alexander's money and influence meant that permits were expedited and the best contractors hired. In just a few weeks, what had been an impossible dream was taking physical shape. The children were beside themselves with excitement, running to the windows every day to watch the workers and the growing structure. Alexander continued to visit regularly, and despite Grace's best efforts to maintain proper distance, they kept finding themselves alone together. He would appear in the library while she was shelving books. He would join her in the kitchen when she was preparing snacks for the children. He would somehow end up walking beside her during her afternoon strolls through the gardens. They talked about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in a wealthy but emotionally cold family, about building his business from a small startup into an empire, about the loneliness that came with success. She found herself sharing things she rarely spoke of: her childhood dreams of being a teacher, her parents' joy when she entered the convent, her struggles with the strictness of religious life. "Do you miss it?" he asked one evening as they sat on a bench in the garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "The life you might have had." Grace considered the question carefully. "Sometimes, I wonder what it would have been like to have my own classroom, my own students, to have freedom to come and go as I pleased. To," she stopped, unwilling to voice the rest, "to have a family of your own." She nodded slowly. "Is that selfish? To want what I've given up?" "It's human," Alexander said gently. "Grace, you were so young when you made these vows. Barely 18 when you entered the order. Did you really know what you were choosing?" "I thought I did." She looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "I believed I was being called, that this was God's plan for my life. And now I don't know," she whispered, and saying it aloud felt like both a confession and a betrayal. "How can I doubt my vocation? How can I question vows I made before God?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "My mother was very religious. She used to tell me that God gave us free will for a reason, that He doesn't want our obedience if it comes from fear or obligation. He wants our love freely given." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe God doesn't need you to be miserable to prove your devotion. Maybe He wants you to be happy, to live fully, to love and be loved." Grace turned to look at him then, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. There was tenderness there, and longing, and something that looked very much like love. "Alexander, I can't." "I know," he reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. It was the first time he'd really touched her since that initial handshake, and the contact sent electricity shooting through her entire body. "I know you can't. You've made promises, and you're not the kind of person who breaks promises. I understand that. I respect it. Then why?" "Because I need you to know. Before I walk away, before I stop coming here and disrupting your peace, I need you to know that I love you." His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "I've loved you since that first day, when you looked at me with those clear blue eyes and talked about faith despite doubt. I love your kindness and your dedication and the way you care for those children as if they were your own. I love your strength and your wisdom and your laugh. That rare, genuine laugh I only hear when you forget to be Sister Grace and just let yourself be Grace." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Please don't do this."
I'm sorry.
"I know I shouldn't, but I couldn't let you go on thinking that no one sees you, that no one values you for who you are rather than what you can give." He lifted her hand and pressed it to his chest, letting her feel his heartbeat. "You are so deeply loved, Grace. By God, yes. By those children, absolutely. But also by me. And I want, God help me, I want you to know that there's another path available to you. If you want it." "I can't want it," she sobbed. "Don't you understand? I gave my life to God. I made vows. Sacred, unbreakable vows. Vows can be dispensed. The church has processes." "No," she pulled her hand away, standing abruptly.
No.
"I won't even consider it. What you're suggesting, it's impossible. Wrong. I'm a nun, Alexander. A bride of Christ. I don't get to change my mind because I met someone who makes me feel." She broke off, unable to finish. "Feel what?" He stood too, facing her in the gathering darkness. "Feel alive? Feel seen? Feel like maybe you deserve more than a life of service and self-denial? I deserve whatever God has planned for me. But even as she said it, her voice broke. Because the truth was, she didn't know anymore what God wanted for her. The certainty that had carried her through 5 years of religious life was crumbling, and she didn't know how to shore it up. Alexander stepped closer, and she should have moved away but couldn't. Grace, I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight. I'm not asking you to break your vows. I'm just asking you to be honest with yourself. About what you want. About what you feel. What I feel doesn't matter. It's the only thing that matters. He was so close now, his face inches from hers. Grace, life is too short to spend it denying your heart. My heart belongs to God. Does it? His hand came up to cup her cheek, and she couldn't help but lean into the touch, starved as she was for human affection. Or have you just convinced yourself it does, because it's easier than admitting you made a mistake? She jerked back as if burned. How dare you? I dare because I love you, because I want you to be happy, even if that happiness isn't with me. If you're truly called to this life, if serving God as a nun brings you joy and fulfillment, then I'll walk away right now and never trouble you again. But Grace. His voice dropped to an aching whisper. If you're only here because you're afraid, because you made a choice at 18 that you're too scared to reconsider, then please think about what you really want. Grace stood frozen, torn between the life she had built and the possibilities stretching out before her like an unknown road. Part of her wanted to run back to the chapel, to bury herself in prayer until these feelings passed. But another part, a part she tried to suppress for years, wanted to step into his arms and never let go. I need to think, she finally said, her voice shaking. I need to pray. I need you to give me space. The light in his eyes dimmed, but he nodded. Of course, I'll stay away from the orphanage. But Grace. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, pressing it into her hand. When you've thought and prayed and made your decision, whatever it is, call me. Please. I need to know you're okay. He left then, walking away through the garden gate, and Grace sank back onto the bench, clutching his card like a lifeline, or a temptation. She wasn't sure which. The next weeks were the hardest of Grace's life. Alexander kept his promise to stay away, but his absence was almost worse than his presence. She found herself looking for him around every corner, disappointed when he wasn't there. The children asked after him constantly, wondering when Mr. Thornwood would visit again. She threw herself into work, caring for the children with even more intensity than usual. She volunteered for extra prayer shifts. She fasted and meditated and did everything she could think of to reconnect with the sense of purpose and peace she'd once felt so strongly. But at night, alone in her small cell, she let herself imagine. What would it be like to leave the order? To wear regular clothes, to let her hair grow long, to walk freely in the world? To explore this connection with Alexander, to see where it might lead. The thought terrified her, but it also thrilled her in a way she couldn't deny. Sister Margaret Mary noticed her distress. You've been troubled lately, she said one afternoon as they folded laundry together. Want to talk about it? Grace hesitated, then decided she needed to confide in someone. Do you ever regret it? Your vows. Sister Margaret Mary paused in folding a small shirt. Sometimes, she admitted. I think everyone does at some point. This life asks a lot of us, Grace. More than most people could bear. Then how do you know you made the right choice? I look at why I chose this life. For me, it was because I genuinely wanted to serve God in this particular way. I tried dating, had a few relationships, and they never felt right. This felt right, she looked at Grace carefully. But I chose this at 35 after living a full life in the world. You chose it at 18, barely more than a child. It's okay if what felt right then doesn't feel right now. But I made vows, which can be dispensed if you discern that you weren't truly called to this life. Grace, the church doesn't want unwilling nuns. If you're only staying out of obligation or guilt, that serves no one. Not you, not the order, not God. Grace pressed her hands to her face. I don't know what I want. Yes, you do, Sister Margaret Mary said gently. You're just afraid to admit it. That evening, Grace returned to the chapel. But instead of kneeling at the altar, she sat in the back pew, looking up at the cross that had been the center of her spiritual life for so long. I don't know what to do, she whispered into the quiet darkness. I thought I knew your plan for me. I thought this was where I belonged. But now everything is confused. If I stay, am I honoring you? Or am I just too afraid to change? No dramatic answer came. No voice from heaven, no sign or miracle. Just the steady silence of the empty church. And somehow, in that silence, Grace found clarity. She thought about what made her truly happy. Reading to the children, but she could do that as a teacher. Caring for others, but there were countless ways to show compassion outside a religious order. Prayer and spiritual contemplation, but lay people had rich spiritual lives too. What she couldn't have as a nun, what she had sacrificed at 18 without fully understanding the cost, was romantic love, partnership, a family of her own, the freedom to make her own choices about her life. And if she was honest with herself, she wanted those things. Maybe she always had, and had just convinced herself she could live without them because it seemed like what she was supposed to do. Grace stood slowly, her decision crystallizing. It would be hard. There would be hurt and disappointment and confusion. Her parents would struggle to understand. The other sisters would feel betrayed. The process of leaving would be complex and painful. But staying when her heart was pulling her elsewhere, that would be a betrayal of a different sort. A betrayal of herself, of the person God had made her to be. She needed to speak with Mother Superior first, to begin the formal process of requesting dispensation from her vows. But there was something else she needed to do tonight. Back in her cell, Grace pulled out Alexander's card. Her hands shook as she dialed the number on the simple cell phone the sisters were allowed for necessary communication. He answered on the second ring. Grace. His voice was rough, as if he'd been asleep, and she realized it was nearly midnight. I'm sorry for calling so late.
No.
I'm glad you called. Are you okay? She took a deep breath. I've been thinking and praying, and I've realized something. What's that? You were right. I was 18 when I entered the order. I thought I knew what I wanted, but I didn't really understand what I was choosing. What I was giving up. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice was steady. I'm going to request dispensation from my vows. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, softly, are you sure? No, she admitted.
I'm terrified.
But I'm also certain that I can't spend the rest of my life wondering what if. I need to know who I am outside these walls. What I might become if I let myself actually live. Grace, I don't want you to do this for me. I'm not, she interrupted. I'm doing it for me, because you made me realize that I deserve more than a life of obligation. Because I want to be free to choose, every day, to wake up and decide how to live and who to love. And maybe that will include you. But I need to do this on my own terms, for my own reasons. She could hear the smile in his voice when he replied. You are the strongest, bravest woman I've ever met. I don't feel brave. I feel like I'm jumping off a cliff. Then I'll be there to catch you, whenever you're ready, however long it takes. They talked for another hour about logistics and fears and hopes. Alexander offered to help her find housing, to support her financially if she needed it. Grace insisted on doing things properly, on not rushing, on taking the time to really think through each step. When they finally said goodnight, Grace felt simultaneously lighter and heavier than she'd ever been. She had set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. Her life was about to change in ways she couldn't predict. But for the first time in years, she felt truly alive. The next morning, Grace requested a private meeting with Mother Superior. In the small office where she'd first met Alexander, she explained her decision. Mother Superior listened quietly, her weathered face showing understanding rather than judgment. I had wondered, the older nun said when Grace finished. You've seemed restless lately, distracted. I'm so sorry. I never meant to fail. You haven't failed, child. You've discerned. That's what this process is for. To help us understand where God is truly calling us. Mother Superior reached across the desk and took Grace's hand. Not everyone is called to religious life, and discovering that you aren't after giving it an honest attempt is not failure. It's wisdom. Grace sobbed with relief. She had feared judgment, condemnation, anger. Instead, she received understanding and support. Mother Superior explained the process for requesting dispensation, the paperwork, the waiting period, the meetings with diocesan officials. It will take several months, Mother Superior warned. The Church moves slowly in these matters. You'll need to continue your duties here during that time, and live as you've been living. I understand. And Grace? Once you've left the order, you'll always be welcome here. The children love you. We could use someone like you on staff. As a lay teacher or counselor, perhaps. The offer touched Grace deeply. Thank you, Mother Superior, for everything. The months that followed were strange ones. Grace continued her work at the orphanage, but now with the knowledge that it was temporary. She found herself noticing things she'd taken for granted. The beauty of morning prayers, the camaraderie of the sisters, the peaceful simplicity of a life devoted to service. She would miss aspects of it, she realized. But she wouldn't miss the restrictions, the constant surveillance, the sense that she wasn't fully her own person. Alexander stayed away, honoring her request for space during this transitional time. But they spoke on the phone most evenings, conversations that ranged from deep and philosophical to silly and mundane. She learned about his life, his work, his dreams. He learned about her fears and hopes and the small details of her personality that had been suppressed under religious life. One evening, 3 months into the process, Alexander asked, "What's the first thing you want to do? When you're free?" Grace thought about it. "Buy jeans," she said finally. "I want to go to a store and buy myself a pair of jeans that fit properly, and maybe a red sweater. I've always loved red." He laughed, that wonderful rich sound she'd come to cherish. "Then that's what we'll do. First day of your new life, we'll go shopping for jeans and a red sweater. And ice cream," she added. "I want to get ice cream and eat it while walking down the street, not worrying about dignity or setting a proper example. Ice cream it is. What flavor? I don't know yet. That's the point. I get to decide." The simplicity of that statement, "I get to decide," held a weight that Alexander seemed to understand. "You're going to be amazing out here, Grace. The world won't know what hit it." 5 months after her initial request, Grace received word that her dispensation had been granted. She was officially released from her vows. She was no longer Sister Grace Margaret. She was just Grace Harper, 23 years old, about to start her life over. Her last day at the orphanage was bittersweet. The children cried, though Mother Superior had explained that Miss Grace, as they would call her now, would be returning to work with them as a teacher. The sisters threw a small farewell gathering, with cake and well wishes and more than a few tears. Grace changed out of her habit for the last time, folding it carefully and placing it in the trunk where it would be stored. She dressed in the simple skirt and blouse that Mother Superior had provided for departing sisters. Not stylish, but serviceable. Her blonde hair, grown somewhat longer during her months of waiting, fell loose around her shoulders for the first time in 5 years. She barely recognized herself in the mirror. Alexander was waiting outside in his car as promised. When she emerged from the orphanage, carrying a small bag with her few possessions, he got out and simply stood there, staring at her. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Do I look strange?" "You look beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I mean, you always looked beautiful. But seeing you like this," he shook his head, smiling. "Grace Harper, it's nice to officially meet you." She laughed, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "It's nice to officially meet you too, Mr. Thornwood." "Alexander," he corrected, opening the car door for her. "Please." "Alexander," she agreed, sliding into the leather seat. The car was impossibly luxurious, all soft surfaces and that new car smell. So different from the old van the sisters used for errands. "Ready for your first adventure?" Alexander asked as he pulled away from the curb. More than ready. They drove to an upscale shopping district, and Grace felt overwhelmed by the sheer abundance of choices. Store after store, all filled with clothes in every color and style imaginable. Alexander patiently followed her from shop to shop as she touched fabrics and marveled at displays. In a casual clothing store, she found the perfect pair of jeans, dark blue, well-fitted, comfortable. And there, on a nearby rack, was a red sweater in soft cashmere. Exactly the shade she'd imagined. "Try them on," Alexander encouraged. And she did, emerging from the dressing room feeling like a completely different person. The jeans hugged her legs in a way that felt simultaneously strange and wonderful. The sweater was warm and bright and made her feel bold. "What do you think?" she asked, turning to show him. Alexander's expression was unreadable for a moment. Then he smiled. "I think you look like yourself." Finally, they bought the clothes, along with several other outfits that Grace selected. Alexander insisted on paying, despite her protests. "Consider it a gift," he said, "to celebrate your new beginning." Next came the promised ice cream. They walked down the busy street, Grace with a cone of mint chocolate chip, Alexander with plain vanilla. People bustled past them, wrapped up in their own lives, and Grace felt anonymous in the best possible way. No one was looking at her, judging her, expecting anything from her. "This is incredible," she said, licking melted ice cream from her fingers. "I feel like I'm discovering everything for the first time." "In a way, you are." Alexander guided her around a puddle with a gentle hand on her elbow. "What do you want to do next? Besides teaching at the orphanage?" Grace considered this. "I want to go to college. Finish my degree. I only completed 2 years before entering the convent," she paused. "But I don't have any money. I'll need to work and save." "I'll pay for it," Alexander said immediately.
No.
"Absolutely not." Grace stopped walking, turning to face him. "Alexander, I appreciate everything you've done, but I need to do this myself. Stand on my own feet. Make my own way." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "I understand, but at least let me help you find a job. I have connections and—" "A job I can accept," she said, smiling, "as long as I earn it fairly." Over the next few weeks, Alexander helped Grace settle into her new life. He connected her with a friend who needed a live-in nanny, which gave Grace both employment and housing. The family, a busy professional couple with 3 young children, was kind and understanding about her unique situation. Grace started working at the orphanage 3 days a week as a teacher's aide, maintaining her connection with the children she loved. The rest of her time was spent caring for the family's children, saving money, and slowly building a life that felt like her own. And through it all, Alexander was there. Not pushing, not demanding, just present. They had dinner together twice a week. He took her to museums and concerts, exposing her to cultural experiences she'd never had. He listened as she processed her complicated feelings about leaving religious life. The guilt, the relief, the confusion, the freedom. "Do you think God is angry with me?" she asked one evening as they sat in a small cafe, sharing a dessert. Alexander considered this seriously. "If God is who you've always said he is, loving, understanding, wanting what's best for his children, then no. I don't think he's angry. I think he's probably glad to see you finally living authentically." "I miss aspects of religious life," she admitted. "The sense of purpose, the community, the spiritual depth. You can have those things outside a convent. Purpose, community, spirituality. None of those belong exclusively to religious orders. I know, it's just different now. Harder to maintain on my own. So don't do it on your own. Find a church community. Connect with other spiritual seekers. Build something new that works for you." He reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. "Grace, you don't have to have everything figured out right now. You're allowed to be confused, to question, to try things and change your mind." She squeezed his hand gratefully. "Thank you for being so patient with me. I'd wait forever if I had to," he said simply. and the sincerity in his voice made her heart clench. 6 months after leaving the convent, Grace finally felt ready to explore the feelings she'd been holding at bay. She and Alexander had grown so close, talking every day, seeing each other several times a week. He was her best friend, her confidant, her strongest supporter. But there was also that undercurrent of attraction, of possibility, that they'd both been carefully not acknowledging. One Saturday, Alexander invited her to his penthouse apartment for dinner. Grace had never been there before. They usually met in public places, maintaining careful boundaries. But something felt different tonight. The apartment was stunning, all floor-to-ceiling windows and modern design. But Alexander had made it warm too, with soft lighting and music playing quietly in the background. He'd cooked dinner himself. Nothing fancy, just pasta and salad. But the gesture touched her. "I didn't know you could cook," she said, accepting a glass of wine. "I'm a man of many hidden talents," he replied with a smile. "I figured it was time you discovered some of them." They ate dinner on his balcony, overlooking the city lights. Conversation flowed easily, as it always did between them. But Grace was acutely aware of the intimacy of the setting, of being alone with him in his private space. After dinner, they moved inside to the living room. Alexander put on soft jazz, and they sat together on his comfortable couch, closer than they usually allowed themselves to be. "Grace," Alexander said after a while, turning to face her, "I need to ask you something." "Okay," she said, her heart rate picking up. "These past 6 months have been incredible. Getting to know you, seeing you discover yourself, being part of your new life. It's been the best 6 months of my life." He took her hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on her skin. "But I need to know where we stand. Are we friends? Are we more? Are we heading somewhere? Or am I just someone helping you transition?" Grace looked down at their joined hands. She'd been asking herself the same questions. "I care about you," she said slowly. "So much. You've become the most important person in my life. But I'm scared." She looked up at him, letting him see her vulnerability. "I've never done this before, Alexander. Never dated, never been in love, at least not like this. I spent my entire adult life in a convent. I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "This," she gestured between them. "Relationships. Romance. I don't know the rules or the expectations. What if I'm terrible at it? What if I disappoint you?" Alexander's face softened. He reached up and cupped her cheek, his touch gentle. "Grace, there are no rules. No expectations except honesty and respect. And you could never disappoint me. You don't know that." "Yes, I do." He leaned closer, his gray eyes intense. "I've been in plenty of relationships, Grace. Some casual, some serious. I've dated women who knew exactly what they were doing, who played all the games expertly. And none of them, not one, made me feel the way you do." "How do I make you feel?" "Like I'm home," he said simply. "Like everything before you was just marking time, waiting for you to appear and make everything make sense." Tears pricked at Grace's eyes. "I feel that too," she whispered. "But I'm still scared." "What scares you most?" "That I'll wake up one day and realize I left the convent for you instead of for me. That I'll resent you for it, or that it will poison what we have." Alexander nodded slowly. "I understand that fear. And if you need more time, if you need space to figure out who you are independently, I'll give you that. But Grace..." He shifted closer, his other hand coming up to frame her face. "I want you to know that what we have, it's real. It's not some rebound from religious life or a rebellion or a phase. I love you. I'm in love with you. And whenever you're ready, whether that's now or a year from now or 10 years from now, I'll be here." Grace's breath caught. She searched his face, seeing only truth and patience and deep, abiding love. And suddenly she knew. She'd left the convent because it was the right choice for her. Because she needed freedom and choice and the opportunity to discover who she really was. Alexander hadn't caused that. He'd simply shown her it was possible. "I don't need more time," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I know who I am. I'm Grace Harper, former nun, current teacher and nanny, future college student. I'm someone who loves children and gardens and red sweaters and mint chocolate chip ice cream. I'm someone who believes in God but wants to experience life fully. And I'm someone who is completely, terrifyingly in love with you. Alexander's breath left him in a rush. Grace. I love you, she said again, stronger now. I love your kindness and your generosity, and the way you listen like what I'm saying is the most important thing in the world. I love how you are with the children. I love your patience with me during all of this. I love that you gave me space when I needed it and support when I asked for it. I love you, Alexander Thornwood. And I'm ready to see where this goes. For a moment, he just stared at her, his eyes shining with emotion. Then he leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers. Grace's first kiss was everything she'd never let herself imagine. Soft and sweet and perfect. Alexander's lips moved gently against hers, asking rather than demanding, and she responded instinctively, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. She could feel his heart racing beneath her palms, as fast as her own. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. I love you so much, he murmured. I'll spend every day proving it to you. You already have, Grace said, and kissed him again. They spent the rest of the evening on his couch, talking and kissing and making plans. Alexander was careful, respectful, never pushing for more than Grace was ready to give. And Grace felt safe with him, safe to explore these new feelings and experiences at her own pace. As the night grew late, Alexander called a car to take Grace home. At the door, he pulled her close one more time. Thank you, he said, for taking a chance on this, on us. Thank you for waiting for me, she replied, for seeing me. I'll always see you, Grace, always. The next months unfolded like a beautiful dream. Grace and Alexander's relationship deepened as she continued to build her independent life. She enrolled in night classes at a local college, working toward her teaching degree. She thrived in her work at both the orphanage and with her nanny family. She made friends outside of religious life for the first time, building a community of her own. And through it all, Alexander was her partner. He celebrated her successes and supported her through challenges. He never tried to fix her problems but listened when she needed to vent. He introduced her to his world, business dinners and charity galas, while respecting when she needed quiet time alone. Grace met his friends, who welcomed her warmly despite being curious about her background. She learned to navigate social situations she'd never experienced before. Sometimes she felt out of her depth, but Alexander was always there, a steady presence at her side. She also maintained her spiritual life, finding a progressive church community where she could worship without the strictures of the convent. She volunteered, prayed, and explored her faith on her own terms. Religion was still important to her, but now it felt like a choice rather than an obligation. 1 year after leaving the convent, Alexander took Grace back to the orphanage for a special occasion. The new wing he'd funded was complete, and they were holding a dedication ceremony. Grace walked through the beautiful new dormitories, seeing the children's faces light up at their new rooms, their new playground, their new library. You did this, she said to Alexander as they stood watching the children play. You changed their lives. We did this, he corrected. I provided the money, but you showed me why it mattered. You gave me purpose beyond just accumulating wealth. Grace leaned into his side, feeling his arm come around her shoulders. Do you remember the first time we met? Right here, in Mother Superior's office. I remember everything about that day. The way the sun backlit you when you walked in. The sound of your voice. The feeling that my entire life had just shifted on its axis. I thought you were just another wealthy donor, Grace admitted. Someone who'd write a check and disappear. And instead I fell completely in love with a beautiful nun who challenged everything I thought I knew about life and faith and what really matters. Grace turned in his arms, looking up at him. Not a nun anymore. No, he agreed, his eyes warm. Now you're just Grace. My Grace. Yours, she repeated, testing the word. A year ago it would have terrified her, the idea of belonging to anyone but God. But now she understood that love wasn't about possession. It was about choice. She chose Alexander every day, just as he chose her. "Grace," Alexander said, his voice suddenly nervous in a way she rarely heard. "There's something I want to ask you." Before she could respond, he was down on one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Grace's hands flew to her mouth, her heart pounding. "Grace Harper," Alexander said, looking up at her with love shining in his gray eyes. "This year with you has been the best of my life. You challenge me, inspire me, make me want to be better. You've taught me about faith and service and what it really means to love someone selflessly. I know we've only been officially together for a year, but I've loved you for longer than that. And I'll love you for the rest of my life. If you'll let me." He opened the box, revealing a stunning but understated diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" Grace looked down at him. This incredible man who had waited for her, supported her, loved her through one of the biggest transitions of her life. She thought about the girl she'd been at 18, entering the convent convinced she knew God's plan. She thought about the young nun who'd been so certain of her path. And she thought about the woman she'd become, still faithful, still dedicated to service, but free to choose her own way. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Alexander. I'll marry you." He stood quickly, sliding the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms and kissing her deeply. Around them, people began to clap. The children, the sisters, the staff, all of whom had gathered to watch this moment unfold. Mother Superior approached, her weathered face wreathed in smiles. "Congratulations, Grace. I'm so happy for you." "Thank you, Mother Superior, for everything, for understanding, for supporting me even when I left." "God's plans are mysterious," the old nun said, her eyes twinkling. "Sometimes the path he sets us on looks nothing like what we expected. But that doesn't make it any less holy." The celebration continued around them, but Grace only had eyes for Alexander, her fiancé, her partner, her choice. They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the church Grace had been attending. It wasn't the grand society wedding Alexander's mother had hoped for, but it was perfect for them, intimate, meaningful, surrounded by the people they loved most. Grace walked down the aisle in a simple white dress, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders, holding a bouquet of flowers from the orphanage garden. The children served as flower girls and ring bearers, their excited faces making everyone smile. The sisters from St. Catherine's sat in the front rows, there to support Grace even though they couldn't entirely approve of the path she'd chosen. When Grace and Alexander said their vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. Grace promised to love and honor Alexander, to be his partner and friend, to build a life with him based on mutual respect and shared values. Alexander promised to cherish and support Grace, to encourage her growth, to be worthy of the gift of her love. "I spent years thinking I dedicated my life to a higher purpose," Grace said during her personal vows, her voice steady despite her tears. "But I've learned that love itself is a higher purpose. Choosing someone every day, building a life together, supporting each other's dreams. That's as sacred as any religious calling. Alexander, you helped me find myself. Now let me spend the rest of my life discovering who we are together." Alexander's own vows spoke of patience and faith, of waiting for the right person even when he didn't know she was coming. "Grace, you taught me that wealth means nothing without purpose, that success is empty without love, that the most important things in life can't be bought or sold. You are my purpose, my love, my life. And I promise to spend every day proving myself worthy of you." When the officiant finally pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was met with cheers and applause. As they walked back down the aisle together, Grace caught sight of herself in one of the church's ornate mirrors. She looked radiant, alive, completely herself. This was nothing like what she'd planned for her life at 18. Nothing like the future she'd imagined when she took her first vows. But it was so much better. Grace and Alexander honeymooned in Italy, spending 2 weeks exploring ancient cities and tiny villages. Grace was enchanted by everything, the art, the architecture, the food, the culture. Alexander delighted in showing her the world, watching her experience things for the first time. When they returned home, they settled into married life with surprising ease. Alexander had bought them a house, not as grand as his penthouse, but perfect for them. It had a large yard where Grace immediately started planning a garden. There was room for children when they were ready, and it was close enough to the orphanage that Grace could continue her work there. Grace finished her degree and was offered a full-time teaching position at St. Catherine's. She accepted happily, thrilled to work with the children she loved, while still maintaining appropriate boundaries as a married woman. Alexander continued his business ventures but became more selective about which projects he took on, prioritizing those that aligned with his and Grace's shared values. They created a life together that blended both their worlds. Grace attended business dinners and charity events at Alexander's side. No longer shy but confident in who she was, Alexander volunteered at the orphanage, using his business skills to help with fundraising and administration. They traveled when they could, hosted dinner parties for friends, and spent quiet evenings at home reading or gardening or simply being together. 2 years into their marriage, Grace discovered she was pregnant. The news terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She had spent so long believing she would never be a mother in the traditional sense, had made peace with caring for other people's children. Now she was going to have a baby of her own, and the magnitude of it overwhelmed her. "What if I don't know what to do?" she asked Alexander one night, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "I've never been a mother." "You've mothered dozens of children at the orphanage," Alexander reminded her gently. "Grace, you're going to be an amazing mother. You already are." "That's different. Those children go home at the end of the day or have other caretakers. This baby will depend entirely on us." "On us?" Alexander repeated, taking her hand. "We're in this together, Grace. I'm going to be figuring it out right along with you." Their daughter was born on a sunny morning in May, with blonde hair like her mother and gray eyes like her father. They named her Hope Catherine. Hope for the new life she represented. Catherine for the orphanage where her parents had met. Grace had never known love like this. She'd loved the children at the orphanage, loved Alexander with all her heart, but holding her own daughter, feeling that tiny hand wrap around her finger, unleashed something primal and powerful in her chest. This was her child, her family, the life she'd never thought she could have. "She's perfect," Alexander whispered, looking down at Hope with wonder in his eyes. "Just like her mother." "We made this," Grace said, marveling. "This little person who didn't exist before, who's part of both of us. It's a miracle." "You're the miracle," Alexander said, kissing her forehead. "You and your courage to choose a different path. Without that, none of this exists. Not our marriage, not our daughter, not this life we've built." Grace looked around the hospital room, at her husband, her daughter, the flowers on the windowsill from the orphanage children. She thought about the winding path that had led her here, all the fear and doubt and difficult choices. She thought about the young woman in a gray habit who had been so certain about her calling, and the person she'd become instead. "Do you know what I realized?" she said softly. "I thought leaving the convent meant abandoning my faith, my purpose. But I didn't abandon anything. I just expanded it. I still serve others. I still pray and seek to do good in the world. I still believe in something bigger than myself. The difference is now you get to choose how you serve," Alexander said. "And you chose love, family, this messy, complicated, beautiful life." "I chose you," Grace corrected. "And I'd make that choice every single day." As she sat there holding her daughter, with her husband beside her and her whole future stretching out ahead, Grace felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. Not the peace of certainty she'd chased in the convent, that false calm that came from following rules and never questioning. This was something deeper, the peace of authenticity, of living truthfully, of being fully, completely herself. She had been Sister Grace Margaret, bride of Christ, dedicated to a life of service and devotion. Now she was Grace Thornwood, teacher, mother, wife, and a woman who had learned that the most sacred vow she could make was to live honestly, love deeply, and never stop growing into the person she was meant to be. And as hope yawned in her arms and Alexander's hand found hers, Grace knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged.